The modern, more recent members in the 40k fandom do not understand the Dark Age that many of us veteran generals had to endure through. Believe it or not, this whole quote-unquote interacting with the fans from GW is relatively new. There was no Warhammer community website, feedback, or GW communication with their player base during the Wardian Dark Age. Facts or any updates or balancing was few and far between, and you were lucky if you got a codex update within 3 to 4 years. Some had to wait over a decade for a new codex, and if one was released being overpowered or underpowered, well, that's what you got, so deal with it. You'd be lucky to get a response from Games Workshop in any way, and there was a genuine wall built up between the players and GW. In prior times, there was some back and forth, and they even had like a community website like they do in modern times, but that had long since been dismissed, and whatever interaction between the fans and GW that happened prior pretty much instilled what seemed like, from the outside at least, a dislike for their fan base. Now, I'm not entirely condemning this Dark Age, because there were upsides too. Many old generals actually prefer the Dark Age and the ages that came before. Though it is an age of stagnation, many grizzled old veterans look back on it with fondness. The game was definitely more Wild West than the current age, and I gotta say I do miss back when you could get a codex and put together an army and not have to buy new stuff many times a year to stay updated and competitive. But a lot of the memes and current fan legacy jokes actually originate from this Wardian Dark Age. Many new players to the game, or the fandom in general, wonder why there is such a hate for GW's poster boys, the Ultramarines. And it is during this Wardian Dark Age that this hate originates. It all comes down to the herald of Mary Sue's himself, Matt Ward, the worst writer to ever be employed by Games Workshop, and the destroyer of dreams. For some reason, GW gave the Destroyer of Hope a lot of free reign and power to influence the 40k universe, and is solely behind the Dark Age that nearly destroyed the franchise. After all, before the Wardian Dark Age, and during, GW always put the author of the Codex up in center. Yet after the Dark Age ended, you don't see that anymore. The author and creator of a codex is no longer slapped across the front of it, and Matthew Ward is the reason why. He's the most notorious and controversial games designer for Games Workshop to have ever lived. Though there was collaboration to an extent, the games designer position wrote the lore for a codex and wrote the rules for the faction as well. Anything with Ward's name on it quickly was reviled by 90% of the community. And some neckbeards have nightmares that he's writing their next codex till this day. See, one of the worst things giving someone so much power like Ward was he very much was a fanboy. We all love our own factions, and those with imagination often daydream about them while inserting parts of themselves into our fantasies. But giving certain types of people power over factions can lead to horrible results. And Ward is the embodiment of this warning tale. You never give an immature fanboy power over an official franchise lore, but GW had to learn this wisdom the hard way. And Ward's greatest love was the Mary Sue Marines, formerly known as the Ultramarines before the Dark Age. Where all the other writers of 40k lore would add new stuff to factions they wrote, they always kept the tone or themes of the original. It's a way to keep fans happy while still growing as a franchise. Common sense stuff, at least from a business point of view. But Matthew Ward had no such respect for established lore or how the fanbase as a whole would react to his deranged heresy. The noble yet flawed Rabute Gilliman was transformed into Raw Booty Girly Man, aka Rowboat Gorilla Man, among many other derogatory titles one would only give to the most Mary Sue of all Mary Sue scum. If I wanted to, I could go on for a while on all the names making fun of Rabute Gilliman. Yet with the rise of Raw Booty Girly Man, so too did the rise come for the Merry Sue Marines. Many factions suffered from the touch of the arch-heretic and bringer of the Dark Age, yet none suffered more than Space Marines. You see, before the Dark Age, all the various chapters from the original legions were pretty equal, give or take, with all of them adding their own unique flair to the lore. Other than the most legendary badass factions, none were considered better or worse than any of the others. They were all different and had something to bring to the table. However, with the coming of the Merry Sue Marines, this fascinating and fantastic aspect of the Adeptus Astartes came to an end. All of a sudden, the Ultramarines were written by Matt Ward to be the chapter all other Space Marines wished they were.
They were the best at everything, and every single other Space Marine wanted to think like them and act like them, other than a small handful of dismissible degenerates.
From this point on, all Space Marine chapters looked to the Ultramarines chapter master as their spiritual liege, and masturbated to his picture when on campaign. Unless it was an Iron Hands Marine, they'd just lubricate their pistons while looking at a pic of Calgar in the corner of the drop pod for obvious reasons. They don't have wieners. Anyway, Ward declared it as official canon that his Merry Sue Marines were
The best chapter ever.
and the bitching continues well past a decade since the Dark Age for his horrific writing. The saddest aspect of it all was before the Wardian Dark Age, the Ultramarines were actually one of the most interesting factions. Yes, I repeat, before the Wardian Dark Age, Ultramarines were actually cool. They were considered all-rounders, basically the jack of all trades and the master of none faction with the Roman Empire vibe. However, Ward decided they were indeed the jack of all trades chapter, but they were also the master of all. It's analogous to a hybrid class in an MMO being superior to all other classes dedicated to specific roles. Doesn't make sense. Whereas before, failure was a theme of the Ultramarines. They failed to reach Terra in time to save the Emperor from being mortally wounded during the Horus Heresy, and the Emperor being forced to sit on the Golden Throne forever in a comatose state. Throughout their 10,000-year history beyond that, they would often take a beating and give as good as they get, always rising nobly to continue the fight against all odds. And I mean, Ultramarines weren't even the original poster boy faction of GW. The Crimson Fists were, of all chapters. But during the Wardian Dark Age, this interesting faction became the delusional fantasy of a pretentious fanboy in the official canon. And every single Space Marine player who didn't play Ultramarines kinda took offense. And by kinda, I mean a lot. Hell, even many Ultramarines players took offense. They lost all the things that made them unique and awesome. Pretty much from that point on, they were only cool to stupid people and chumps with ego issues, insecure people, trying to convince themselves that they are superior even though they know that they suck balls and hate themselves in their hearts. Yet Ward's Merry Sue Marines were not the only faction to suffer during the Dark Age. The Grey Knights, Blood Angels, Demons of Chaos, and Necrons would suffer from the touch of the Bringer of Darkness as well, with all of the heroes that he'd push forth into prominency basically just being Saturday morning cartoon heroes, with Caldor Drago probably the best example of this as his main attribute. The same main attribute of the Ultramarines, Merry Sue power. You can face anything in the 40k universe if you got plot armor as thick as Matt Ward's brain, though it's empty on the inside. Still, Ward is not only a horrible lore writer, he's also a terrible 40k player and tactician in general. This is self-evident because he wrote the most broken codices in the history of the game. And that's saying a lot. I believe we all remember the recent Iron Hands Codex supplement. But it got to the point that if you didn't play a Matt Ward Codex, then you really didn't stand a chance in any competitive sense. There was no balance or thought put into his codices when considering the other factions in the game. I played Ward's 7th edition Warhammer Fantasy Demons of Chaos Codex, and it is the most overpowered army I ever played, before or since. It was so overpowered it may have broken Warhammer Fantasy and led to the end times itself, which destroyed the game altogether. I mean, not really, but let's just go with it. Because, we all know Ward faps to these codices till this day, and became incredibly empowered in the warp from drinking the tears of neckbeards from across the planet. Still, the Ultramarines are not the greatest heresy to some longtime players. For many, his greatest sin was the controversial Necron Codex from the Dark Age. Ward looked at the established Necron fluff and was just like, nah, son, and then ruined all of it. He literally changed everything about them and their Satan star gods. Before Ward, the Satan were not shards or even controlled by the Necrons. They did not kill their gods. They were ruled by the Satan and could kind of like summon them, pieces of them. So the Satan were very much still around and busy doing stuff. And with Ward completely destroying the established canon of one of the oldest races in Warhammer 40k, it snowballed into multiple other factions that have established lore too, in kind of a cascading wave of retcons out of necessity. And no one gets more pissed off about lore retcons than Eldar fans, so I'm sure you can imagine how that went. The fan base of Necrons revolved under pretty distinct aspects. Many were fans of the Necrons because they were space terminators that were so advanced they were unknowable. If you could actually kill one, they just teleported away on the spot. And to those that they fought against, it seemed like they were led by lords who were sentient and beyond mere machines that communicated with mysterious beings they called gods. Since there was no way to capture any of them and they never left behind any corpses or anything like that, or even like really functioning technology, there was this really cool factor to them that left a lot to the imagination. Necrons were incredibly mysterious. But then the Dark One came along, and he decided that they were actually all Egyptians in space, and diced up all the Terminator lore that people loved about them. Though, there are factions of heretic neckbeards that enjoyed the change in the fluff. I know one, his name is Jay. Jay, you But they are to be purified in flame on sight. Never forget that. However, despite his many sins against the hobby, he did have a small fan base of WAC players. WAC stands for Win at All Costs, and are also known as power gamers. These extremists are known as the Ward Bearers, the Wardenites, or the followers of the Book of Ward. They are shunned by any decent wargamers and put to death in the name of the Emperor by all true fans. Yet, the Word Bearers have managed to survive. Whether they have some connection to the Word Bearers isn't known, but they definitely suck as hard as Lorgar, so it's pretty probable. The Wardian Dark Age caused such chaos and destruction to the point the very foundations of this plane of reality shook loose, almost shattering into fractal pieces. There were those who detested the Dark One so much that they literally made death threats against him, which is up and stupid. But you can see how we barely made it out and into the light from his oppressive darkness. The Wardian Dark Age officially ended in 2014, though near the end, the light was already beginning to shine through the shadows. Games Workshop began to listen and to communicate with their player base, and a whole new generation of fans came in a herd, coming to the hobby, dribbling for their plastic crack. Seriously, there was not only a huge new influx of players, but there was just a whole new influx of fans of 40k in general, across all spectrums. However, though the fandom was raised from the abyss and into a new age, the Bringer of Darkness was quietly rehired by Games Workshop in 2016. Despite this heresy, The Dark One would never again have the same tyrannical grip around the throat of the established canon as he once did. Though there are Wardian cultists who claim that the Dark One never left, and instead was just put on hiatus from GW to stop all the death threats, drama, and fan rage. In the end, Black Library had to write entire books to fix the damage that Ward did to the canon, and GW has been trying to fix the Ultramarines ever since, to varying degrees of success depending on who you ask. No Death Guard fan will ever forgive the Herald of Mary Sue's for what he did to their beloved Mortarion, so easily defeated by the King of Mary Sue's, Caldor Drago. And few of the elite veteran generals of the hobby will ever forgive the Dark One for throwing aside beloved canon to establish his Wardian, childish, fanboy, headcanon over fluff that's actually, good. Matthew Ward embodies the worst fanboy fanfiction pushed as official canon and wrote the most overpowered and broken rules ever to be approved by GW. He destroyed multiple factions in the 40k universe and is the core reason the community hates the Mary Sue Marines. However, despite what many grizzled old generals may think, he is not behind the return of Raw Booty Girly Man or the coming of the Primaris Marines. Many newer wargamers to the hobby are unaware of the hardened survivors of the Wardian Dark Age, and that GW has taken a 180 considering how they interact with the community. There has never been more updates and new stuff to nerd over as there is in the hobby's present age, and that it's actually a wonderfully exciting time to be a Warhammer 40k fan. This is a golden age, despite what many neckbeards may say.